I'm Chris Farrell, and this is On Watch from Guatemala City, Guatemala. I'm giving you an update from our October 19th On Watch show, where I talked to you, and I gave you some homework actually, about the importance of learning and finding out what's going on in the country of Guatemala, a longtime ally and friend of the United States that's really seeing a very dangerous form of subversion, an effort to undermine the lawful election of President Morales and his administration by a group of a really strange alliance, a cast of characters that you almost need a scorecard to keep track of. It includes a UN commissioner who is operating way outside the scope of his authority, a guy by the name of Velasquez, a leftist attorney general who is running around holding press conferences announcing that she's going to investigate people, but not announcing any arrests or prosecutions. You can figure out how that's upside down. And then also a situation where there are other sort of forces at work. There are ideologues even within the U.S. Embassy. The former ambassador, a guy by the name of Todd Robinson, and the professional staff within the embassy are actually meddling in and injecting themselves into the internal sovereign questions that Guatemala faces. A lot of you know, at Judicial Watch, if you're friends and you follow our work, we just don't sit and talk about things. We go out and we litigate and we investigate. And in this regard, I'm here in Guatemala, and I've talked to senior leaders across the spectrum, leaders in business, in academia, in labor, within the government, different folks within the legal professions. All of those folks, that full spectrum of very senior leaders I've spent time with here during my visit in Guatemala to really uncover what's going on. And frankly, it's pretty grim. It's a situation where a professional political class, both within the hierarchy of the Guatemalan state, with some of these outside influencers, people like George Soros and the front operations he runs, as well as even Hillary Clinton's organization that she started called Vital Voices. All these folks are ideologically aligned, and they're coming at this administration from the left in really what political scientists and folks who are very familiar with unconventional warfare, what they would call a Maoist subversion. These folks are involved in creating an alternate, a separate dual government that attempts to not just destabilize President Morales, but really, to be frank, they want to put President Morales and his administration and their families in jail. And that sounds like rough language, sounds like something that's sort of extreme or on the edge, but there are very real dangers going on in Guatemala, there's an impact, right? There's a broader view to this. This is a hemispheric crisis. This is a good neighbor. It's the country immediately south of Mexico. It's geographically, it's our ally and our friend, and historically it has been. It's a democratic republic with free elections. They've had cases where they've been at a virtual civil war within the country itself, but they came to peace terms. It's a country that has experienced a lot of corruption. But again, there are instances where they've policed themselves, they've worked to clear up corruption. There are still problems, but in general, they've really moved far beyond what they were years ago. And I think it's our obligation, the best neighbors are good neighbors that we talk with and deal with. But when you have an environment where political disagreement, arguments over policy or different points of view, when those things become criminalized, and when people who don't agree with this alternate structure, this effort at really a subversion of the lawful government, if you don't agree with them, you're jailed, or you're called corrupt and you're smeared. This is an outrageous abuse of not just the political system, but the legal system. And really, it's a demonstration for us. It is something that we need to look at in the United States, because we know what the deep state is. We know what this fourth branch of government, this sort of professional political class that has done so much to undermine and destabilize and delegitimize a new administration coming into power. We've seen that in our own country. And, we're not alone. This is not in isolation. The same ideologues, the same people who are Obama holdovers, both in the United States but also here in Guatemala, they're conducting the same sorts of activities. Their efforts are to undermine and delegitimize, to really negate an election. Some of the folks I've talked about early on in this particular edition of On Watch, this fellow named Velasquez, who's the head of this UN-appointed commission. If you look at the webpage for this commission, Velasquez shows up in pictures on this one homepage in 6 different places. This is a guy who the current government asked to please be removed. They were not comfortable with him and his tactics. And instead, there was an effort made to force this guy on a sovereign country. He views himself essentially as the last viceroy of New Spain. He thinks he can overcall and in essence pressure a sovereign government to do as he wills. And this is a case where if you can't win an election, well, then you subvert it. And that's what we're seeing in Guatemala. And this is a warning sign to us in the United States, right? This is an example of how when the legal institutions break down, when you don't have the ability to go before court and make a claim and seek justice, you're not necessarily guaranteed justice, but you're guaranteed a shot at it. When all of that collapses, we're in grave trouble. And so, I've been following up, and I'll continue to follow up on this case in Guatemala because it shows problems within our own State Department, frankly. It shows problems with how we can help an ally and a friend really work on their own internal defense, and to shut down an unlawful subversion of a freely elected government that's lawfully occupying its position as an administration. There's lessons to be learned. We need to take this study that I'm doing and apply it to our own circumstances in the United States. We don't want to slide any further in the direction of a lawless or a failed state. And if we ignore things like this, not just at home, but if we ignore it with our close neighbors, we put ourselves at risk. And we put other democratic republics who are sovereign countries at risk. President Trump is very famous, of course, for saying America first. But what he doesn't say is America alone, right? He says America first, but with our allies. And this is a case where we have an allied country, a good friend, and their problems may be a reflection or at least a parallel to something that we need to look at. And so I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to come here to Guatemala City and to meet with these senior leaders across the spectrum of their society and get the truth. Spend hours talking with them, understanding the context, the situation, and really having a moment to pause and see how that reflects on the United States and our constitutional republic. So again, this is an opportunity for you to do a little more homework and to learn about this sort of bubbling crisis. We've got an elected leader who's facing challenges, and that's both true in Guatemala and in the United States. So what does that say to us? What can we learn from that? And I'd encourage you to think about that, to communicate with your elected representatives about that, and let them know, hey, listen, there's a situation in Guatemala that merits our attention. We need to take care of ourselves, but we also need to take care of our good friends. And how is that resolved? So with that, I'll close out this edition of On Watch. Thanks for joining us. I'm Chris Farrell, On Watch.